virtual summit with his Chinese counterpart, Xi Jinping. Both parties emphasized the importance of their personal relationship and their attempts to ease tensions between the two nations.
We never walk away wondering what the other man is thinking. And I think that's an important ingredient for this relationship, to be open and candid.
I stand ready to work with you, Mr. President, to build consensus, take active steps, and move China-US relations forward in a positive direction.
But China is issuing a sharp warning for the U.S. when it comes to the issue of Taiwan. Beijing considers the self-ruled island to be part of its territory. Last night, she told President Biden that any U.S. support of Taiwan's independence movement would be like, quote, playing with fire. For more on this, we want to bring in Ed O'Keefe, who is at the White House. Ed, how is the White House responding to this after the president's meeting with Xi Jinping?
So this was a late night in Washington and an early morning in Beijing. It was an even later night for reporters who were trying to stay up and figure out what the heck happened, because the White House held a briefing for reporters after midnight last night. We owe a few of our colleagues a cup of black coffee for staying up and listening to it. The administration essentially tells us that it was a 3.5-hour call, substantial back and forth, as they put it, that was, quote, respectful and straightforward, and it was open. There was conversation about human rights, for example, and as the administration official who briefed reporters told us, they essentially agreed that they have very different views on that subject, a pretty profound one between the United States and China. There was not as much talk about trade as you might think, given that that is also a pretty central sticking point. And as you noted, some pretty harsh rhetoric from the Chinese in the hours after the meeting regarding Taiwan, essentially telling the U.S. to stay out of it. But of course, that remains a big concern for American military officials and the president as we continue to see some pretty provocative moves by the Chinese.
Is standing by. Bradley, good morning. What are we hearing from world leaders?
Anne-Marie, world leaders are strongly condemning this Russian invasion. Last night here at the United Nations, the Security Council held an emergency session, and it was happening as the first explosions were being reported in Ukraine. The Secretary General of the United Nations called on President Putin to bring his troops back to Russia. But on the ground in Ukraine, it is clear that a war is underway. Russia's invasion of Ukraine is now underway. Explosions were seen and heard across the country overnight. Russian President Vladimir Putin announced the start of the offensive in a pre-dawn speech. Putin said the action was necessary to protect civilians and restore order. He said Russia's goals include the, quote, demilitarization and denazification of Ukraine. Putin called on the Ukrainian military to surrender and warned other nations not to interfere. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky appeared on television as the invasion got underway. He urged people not to panic and said he had just spoken with President Biden. The White House condemned what it called an unprovoked and unjustified attack by Russia. Here at the United Nations, diplomats gathered for an emergency Security Council meeting. It's the Council's second emergency meeting this week on Ukraine.
We're here for one reason and one reason only: to ask Russia to stop.
During last night's session, the Ukrainian ambassador confronted his Russian counterpart.
There is no purgatory for war criminals. They go straight to hell, Ambassador.
The Security Council is expected to vote on a resolution against Russia today. However, it is unlikely to pass because, as a permanent council member, Russia holds veto power. Ukraine has now cut off diplomatic relations with Russia, and it's important to note that the attacks in Ukraine are happening not just in the air and on the ground, but also cyber attacks targeting Ukrainian websites. That is just another part of this Russian offensive, Anne-Marie.
And that is something that has been going on for years in Ukraine. So in regards to the president's